Welcome to my channel. Together we get comfortable, get deep, healing sleep hearing about ancient Aksumite civilization. Before going comfortable, subscribe my channel and let me know from which country you are hearing from. The geological and agrarian baselines of the Tigray Plateau, the tectonic and basaltic foundation. To understand the nocturnal habits and the structural nature of rest within the ancient Aksumite civilization, one must first establish a thoroughly comprehensive understanding of the physical geography and geological formations that define the Tigray Plateau. During the first millennium of the Common Era, the Kingdom of Aksum did not emerge in a vacuum. Rather, its domestic architectures, urban centers, and rural hinterlands were fundamentally shaped by the weathering of tertiary volcanic traps. The foundational geology consisted primarily of thick layers of trap basalts, interspersed with localized deposits of phonolites, trachytes, and pyroclastic rocks. Over millions of years, the slow, relentless processes of fluvial erosion carved this volcanic landscape into a complex topography of flat-topped mountains, locally referred to as ambas, separated by deep, meandering river valleys and broad, undulating structural basins. It was within these specific structural basins, situated at elevations ranging between 2,000 and 2,400 meters above sea level, that the demographic weight of the Aksumite core established its permanent settlements. The elevation was a critical, stabilizing variable. At this altitude, the atmospheric pressure and ambient temperature regimes differed markedly from the hyper-arid, low-lying coastal plains of the Red Sea Basin to the east, and the humid, malaria-prone river valleys of the Nile drainage system to the west. The plateau environment provided a temperate, semi-arid climate characterized by a bimodal rainfall pattern, driven by the seasonal migration of the intertropical convergence zone. This atmospheric system delivered the crimped rains between June and September, followed by the less predictable Belg showers in the early spring months. The soil profile resulting from the decomposition of these volcanic basalts was predominantly comprised of vertisols and cambasols, heavy, dark clays rich in iron, magnesium, and calcium, yet exceptionally labor-intensive to cultivate. The physical properties of these vertisols meant that, during the prolonged dry season, known locally as the biga, the soil would contract significantly, forming deep, vertical fissures that cracked the landscape into a mosaic of dehydrated clay blocks. Conversely, with the onset of the summer rains, these fissures would swell shut, rendering the terrain highly impermeable, muddy, and exceedingly difficult for pedestrian or draft animal transit. It was against this rigid, unyielding seasonal cycle of soil contraction and expansion that the ancient Aksumite population structured both their diurnal labor and their nocturnal periods of immobilization. The relationship between the agriculturalist and the soil matrix was one of constant, repetitive physical expenditure. The maintenance of soil fertility required the continuous terracing of hillside slopes to mitigate the destructive impact of sheet erosion during high-intensity, convective storms. Stones were painstakingly cleared from the fields and stacked into dry stone retaining walls that followed the natural contours of the topography. These stone terraces, while highly efficient at retaining moisture and preventing the loss of topsoil, required constant structural maintenance. Every stone placed by an Aksumite farmer represented a micro-investment of kinetic energy derived from a diet heavily reliant on localized cereal cultivation. As the sun crossed the meridian each day, dropping gradually toward the western horizon beyond the Shire Highlands, the intensity of solar radiation hitting the dark basaltic soils began to wane. The thermal energy absorbed by the dark clays during the peak daylight hours would slowly begin to radiate back into the lower atmosphere, creating a brief period of ambient warmth immediately following dusk. However, due to the high elevation and the low relative humidity of the plateau, this residual thermal energy dissipated rapidly into the clear, cloudless night sky. The temperature drop was predictable, sharp, and consistent, often fluctuating by as much as 15 to 20 degrees Celsius within a single 12-hour cycle. This sharp nocturnal cooling was the primary environmental catalyst that drove the Aksumite population from their fields and open-air domestic courtyards into the heavily insulated interiors of their stone and timber dwellings. The domestication of cereal crops and energetic expenditure, the daily expenditure of physical energy in Aksumite society was inextricably bound to the cultivation of specific, highly adapted cereal crops, most notably Eragrostis teff, commonly known as teff, alongside hulles barley hordeum vulgare, emmer wheat triticum decocum, and various pulse crops such as grass pea, lentils, and chickpeas. The cultivation of teff, an endemic grass with exceptionally minute seeds, demanded a meticulous and repetitive preparation of the seedbed that was unique to the Horn of Africa, because the seed of teff is so small, often requiring over 150 grains to equal the mass of a single kernel of wheat. The soil had to be plowed multiple times to create an exceedingly fine, uniform tilth. The primary implement utilized for this task was the marasha, a lightweight, single-pronged traction ard tipped with an iron point, drawn by a pair of humped zebu cattle bos indicus. The operation of the marasha did not invert the soil profile in the manner of a European moldboard plow. Instead, it merely scratched a shallow furrow through the clay, breaking up the surface crust and disturbing the root systems of competing weed species. To achieve the necessary soil fineness for teff germination, an Aksumite plowman would have to traverse a single field up to 3, 4, or even 5 times in cross-cutting patterns. This required the farmer to walk several kilometers per day behind the draft animals, maintaining constant downward pressure on the wooden stilt of the plow, while simultaneously managing the direction of the oxen with a leather whip or a pointed goad. The physical toll of this repetitive agricultural labor was concentrated primarily in the lumbar region of the spine, the quadriceps, and the deltoid musculature of the upper body. The constant adjustments required to maintain the depth of the iron plowshare against the hidden obstructions of subsurface basalt boulders created a continuous pattern of isometric muscular strain. By the time the agricultural labor day concluded, the physical body of the Aksumite farmer was dominated by a profound state of metabolic fatigue. This fatigue was not merely the result of acute exertion, but rather the cumulative effect of weeks of sustained seasonal labor under the intense UV radiation of the high-altitude sun. Furthermore, the process of post-harvest processing added a secondary, equally exhausting layer of physical demands, particularly upon the female demographic of the household. Once the teff or barley was harvested using small, curved iron sickles, the crop was transported to a communal threshing floor, a flat, circular area of hardened clay or exposed bedrock. Here, the grain was separated from the straw through the repetitive trampling of livestock or the manual application of wooden flails. The subsequent step, winnowing, required the grain and chaff mixture to be repeatedly tossed into the air using wooden forks, relying on the predictable afternoon thermal breezes to blow away the lighter chaff while the heavier grain fell vertically back to the ground. The final and most energetically expensive phase of food preparation was the manual reduction of the grain into flour. This was accomplished exclusively through the use of saddlecorns, large, stationary blocks of abrasive basalt or granite with a concave upper surface, upon which a smaller, cylindrical handstone, or rubber, was moved back and forth. The kinetic action of grinding grain on a saddlecorn required the operator to kneel on the ground, leaning forward over the stone matrix, and use the weight of the entire upper torso to crush the grain between the two mineral surfaces. This repetitive, rhythmic motion exerted severe structural stress on the knee joints, the lower back, the wrists, and the rotator cuffs. Anthropological examinations of skeletal remains from Aksumite domestic contexts frequently reveal pronounced osteoarthritis and hyperdevelopment of the muscle insertion points along the clavicle and humerus, directly indicating a life defined by this relentless mechanical labor. The metabolic cost of this processing meant that a significant percentage of the daily caloric intake was expended simply in the preparation of the next meal. When the grinding process was complete, the flour was mixed with water to form a fermented batter, which was subsequently baked on flat ceramic griddles known as mogogo, heated by fires fueled with dried cattle dung or brushwood. The consumption of this food, while providing the necessary carbohydrates and proteins to sustain life, marked the definitive transition from the active, productive phase of the domestic cycle to the passive, restorative phase. The digestion of complex carbohydrates naturally initiated a shift in blood flow away from the skeletal musculature toward the splanchnic circulation, inducing a state of postprandial somnolence that aligned precisely with the fading of natural daylight. The acoustic environment of the rural hinterland. To fully comprehend the transition into sleep within an ancient Aksumite settlement, one must attempt to reconstruct the acoustic landscape, or soundscape, that existed in the absence of any industrial or electronic noise pollution. The auditory environment of a rural Aksumite village was governed entirely by natural, biological, and low-intensity mechanical sounds. During the peak daylight hours, the soundscape was dominated by the rhythmic thudding of hand stones against grinding corns, the shouting of children herding sheep and goats along the rocky hillsides, the occasional braying of donkeys transporting goods to localized trade nodes, and the vocal commands of plowmen directing their oxen across the clay fields. These sounds, while constant, were diffuse and distributed across an open-air landscape, muffled by the non-reflective surfaces of mud brick walls, thatched roofs, and natural vegetation. As the sun set, the human-generated components of the soundscape experienced a rapid, systemic decline. The cessation of manual labor brought about a profound stillness, which allowed lower-frequency environmental sounds to become prominent. In the early evening, the primary acoustic input shifted to the biological sounds of domestic livestock housed within or adjacent to the human dwelling structures, the low-frequency rumination of cattle, the rustling of sheep against the stone walls of their enclosures, and the occasional soft vocalizations of goats created a continuous, predictable background hum. This biological white noise was deeply familiar to the Aksumite sleeper, serving as an auditory indicator of domestic security and economic stability. The silence of the livestock would have indicated the presence of predators or human intruders, thereby triggering an immediate state of hyperarousal. Beyond the immediate perimeter of the domestic compound, the broader landscape contributed its own seasonal acoustic variables. During the wet cramped season, the sound of falling rain on thatched roofs or flat clay terraces provided a high-volume, highly consistent acoustic masking effect. The sound of water droplets striking organic materials like straw, reed, or compacted earth produces a broad-spectrum pink noise that effectively drowns out transient, high-frequency sounds that might otherwise startle a sleeper. Furthermore, the filling of ephemeral streams, or wadis, created a distant, continuous rushing sound that reverberated through the valleys, providing a rhythmic cadence that structured the nocturnal environment for months at a time. Conversely, during the dry Biga season, the acoustic landscape became significantly crisper and more transparent. In the thin, dry air of the high-altitude plateau, sound traveled with minimal atmospheric dampening. The rustling of dry acacia pods in the nocturnal breeze, the crackle of cooling stones contracting after a day of intense solar heating, and the distant, territorial vocalizations of nocturnal predators such as the spotted hyena, Crocuta crocuta, and the golden jackal Canis aureus would pierce the stillness. The Aksumite ear was finely tuned to these subtle acoustic shifts. The ability to transition into deep sleep amidst the calls of apex predators required a high degree of confidence in the structural integrity of the domestic architecture, which functioned not only as a shelter from the elements but as a physical fortress against the zoological dangers of the nocturnal landscape. As the night progressed into the early morning hours, typically between midnight and 3 a.m., the acoustic environment reached its point of maximum stasis. The wind would often die down completely as the plateau air cooled and stabilized, leaving a profound, heavy silence, broken only by the physiological sounds of the sleepers themselves, the rhythmic rise and fall of breath, the occasional shifting of limbs against straw bedding, and the low murmurs of dream state vocalizations. This deep acoustic vacuum was an essential component of the sleep environment, allowing the human central nervous system to cycle undisturbed through the deeper stages of non-REM sleep, unburdened by the unpredictable auditory spikes that characterized the modern urban landscape. Architectural typologies and thermal mass, the physical container within which Aksumite sleep occurred, varied significantly, depending on the social stratification of the individual. Yet all structural typologies shared a fundamental reliance on local stone and timber resources to manipulate the microclimate of the sleeping chamber. For the vast majority of the population residing in the rural hinterlands and peripheral agricultural communities, the standard domestic structure was the ordinary rebel stone hut, or mekale. These dwellings were typically circular or subrectangular in plan, with foundations constructed from undressed blocks of local basalt or limestone, held together with a simple mud mortar or laid dry. The walls of these structures were built with a substantial thickness, often varying between 50 and 80 centimeters. This structural density was not merely an artifact of primitive construction techniques. It served an essential thermodynamic function. The high thermal mass of thick stone walls acted as a thermal flywheel, effectively dampening the extreme diurnal temperature fluctuations of the high-altitude environment throughout the long daylight hours. As the exterior of the stone wall was subjected to intense solar radiation, the high specific heat capacity of the basalt delayed the transmission of this thermal energy to the interior of the structure. The heat wave moved through the stone matrix at a predictable, slow rate of approximately 2 to 3 centimeters per hour. Consequently, it was not until the late evening or early night hours, long after the sun had set and the exterior ambient air temperature had dropped precipitously, that the thermal energy absorbed during the day finally reached the interior surface of the wall. This delayed heat release was critical at the precise moment when the human body was transitioning into sleep, and its core metabolic temperature was beginning to drop. The interior stone walls of the dwelling began to gently radiate long-wave infrared energy into the sleeping chamber. This natural, passive radiant heating system mitigated the need for continuous indoor wood fires, which would have compromised the air quality of the unventilated space through the accumulation of carbon monoxide and particulate matter. Above these stone walls sat the roof structure, which in rural contexts was universally constructed from organic materials, a framework of radial timber poles, typically harvested from local acacia abyssinica or wild olive, Olea europea subsp. Cuspidata trees, was secured to the wall plate. This framework was then covered with thick layers of bundled thatch, derived from wild grasses or the leftover straw of cereal harvests. The thatched roof possessed exceptional insulation properties, preventing the rapid escape of the rising, warm air generated by the human occupants and the residual heat of the stone walls. Furthermore, the porous nature of the thatch allowed for a slow, passive exchange of air, preventing the stagnation of humidity inside the single-room structure while simultaneously preventing the penetration of cold nocturnal drafts. Within the Mecca lay these intricately carved stone structures found in ancient Aksum. The space was organized with a distinct, clear geometric division between functional zones. The central area typically remained reserved for the hearth, or, as they were known, the gyur, while the spaces located along the curved walls were designated for various purposes. Some of these areas were used for storage and rest, whereas others were designated for sleeping purposes. The sleeping area itself was rarely elevated on intricate and elaborate furniture. Instead, it was constructed utilizing the earth-borne material known as medub. This platform raised approximately 10 to 30 centimeters above the primary floor level facilitated protection of the sleeper from the cold, dense air naturally present at the absolute floor level, as well as minimizing exposure to ground-dwelling insects and dampness. The medub acted as the structural foundation of the Aksumite sleep environment, effectively anchoring the domestic life of the household directly to the very earth they cultivated. In the context of ancient Aksum, these stone structures were far more than just temporary shelters or sleeping places. They functioned as centers of communal life, where households shared a living space with an open hearth, providing a shared sense of warmth and comfort. Through the organization of functional zones within the Mecca, the Aksumites managed to prioritize both comfort and practicality during their daily lives. In this sense, the Mecca served as a fundamental building block of the collective identity and sense of belonging within the Aksumite society. Through their use of the earth-borne medub, these ancient people created a sustainable, earth-centered living environment that allowed them to thrive within their agricultural domain. The Aksumite Empire did not emerge overnight. Its foundations were laid over centuries through the gradual blending of indigenous African cultures and migrating South Arabian communities. Long before Aksum became a dominant regional power, the northern Ethiopian and Eritrean highlands were home to a complex mosaic of farming communities. Around the first millennium BCE, these disparate groups began to coalesce, influenced heavily by their proximity to the Red Sea trade corridors. The pre-Aksumite era and Mount, before Aksum, the most notable organized polity in the region was the Kingdom of Dmt, also spelled Damit, which flourished from roughly the 9th to the 5th centuries BCE, centered around the site of Yeha in modern-day northern Ethiopia. Dmount represents a critical transitional phase. Agricultural roots, the economy relied heavily on ox-drawn plows, cultivating local grains like teff alongside wheat and barley. South Arabian contact, Dmt maintained deep ties with the Sabaean kingdom of modern-day Yemen. This connection brought distinctive architectural styles, religious practices honoring Arabian deities like Almaka, and the South Arabian monumental script, cultural synthesis. While older historical theory suggested Mount was a mere colony of Saba, modern archaeological consensus views it as a highly indigenous African kingdom that actively adapted, and integrated foreign prestige elements. The fragmented interregnum. When the DMT kingdom collapsed around the 4th century BCE, the region fractured into several smaller, localized chiefdoms and independent settlements. For 3 centuries, no single power dominated the highlands. However, this period of political fragmentation was far from stagnant. Instead, it was an era of intense local competition, demographic growth, and technological refinement. Ironworking became widespread, dramatically improving agricultural yields and weaponry, while regional trade networks continued to quietly expand toward the coast. The shift to Aksum. By the 1st century BCE, a strategic shift occurred. The focus of regional power moved away from older centers like Yeha toward the fertile, high-altitude plateau of Aksum. This specific geographic location offered immense advantages. Natural fortifications. The surrounding mountains provided a defensive shield against external invasions. Perennial water sources. Access to reliable streams and fertile soil sustained a rapidly growing urban population. Trade crossroads. Aksum sat perfectly between the gold and ivory-rich African interior and Agilis, a booming port city on the Red Sea coast. As the 1st century CE dawned, one dominant chiefdom in this valley successfully consolidated its rule over rival settlements, setting the stage for a centralized state that would soon capture the attention of the Greco-Roman world. The agrarian foundations and siltation dynamics. The economic stability of the Aksumite Empire rested on a highly repetitive cycle of rain-fed agriculture. Farmers relied heavily on the biannual monsoon rains, known as the Kremt and Belg seasons, which dictated the precise schedule of soil preparation. The primary crop was teff, a minuscule grain requiring meticulous field leveling and multiple rounds of shallow plowing using extrawn ard plows. Because teff seeds are exceptionally small, agricultural laborers spent hours broadcasting the seed uniformly by hand across terraced hillsides, followed by repetitive weeding cycles to prevent invasive grasses from choking the yield. Soil composition in the Aksumite highlands consisted largely of weathered volcanic basalt, which provided a nutrient-rich but highly erodible topsoil. As population density increased around the urban center, systemic deforestation occurred to satisfy the demand for firewood and structural timber. The removal of the root systems exposed the loose volcanic soils to the heavy, concussive downpours of the summer monsoons. This initiated a slow, centuries-long process of sheet erosion, where thin layers of fertile topsoil were systematically washed down the gradient of the hillsides into the valley floors. The accumulation of this eroded material resulted in extensive siltation across the domestic water networks. Aksumite engineers had constructed a series of low-elevation check dams and earth embankment reservoirs to capture seasonal runoff for livestock watering. Over decades, fine clay particles and microsediments settled at the bottom of these basins, gradually reducing their volumetric capacity. The maintenance of these communal reservoirs required manual dredging, an arduous task involving the physical excavation of wet silt using wooden shovels and woven baskets, which was repeated annually before the arrival of the spring rains. The strategic geography and trade networks of Aksum. The rise of the Aksumite Empire from a local agricultural hub to a dominant global superpower relied entirely on its geographic positioning. Aksum sat at the crossroads of 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. This unique location allowed the empire to control vital trade routes that connected the Mediterranean world to India and East Asia. The gateway of Agilis. The lifeblood of Aksumite commerce was the port city of Agilis, situated on the Gulf of Zula along the Red Sea coast. Agilis served as the primary entry and exit point for all international goods. Maritime hub. Ships from Egypt, Greece, Rome, Persia, and India docked at Agilis daily. Inland connection. A steep, well-guarded mountain route connected Agilis to the inland capital city of Aksum. Customs revenue. The Aksumite state levied heavy taxes on all imports and exports passing through the port. Primary export commodities. Aksum controlled the access points to the rich resources of the African interior, making it the exclusive supplier of highly valued luxury goods to the ancient world. Ivory, obtained from East African elephants, Ivory was highly sought after by Roman and Byzantine craftsmen for carvings. Frankincense and myrrh, these aromatic resins, harvested from the arid regions of the Horn of Africa, were essential for religious ceremonies across the Mediterranean and Middle East. Gold, mined in the southern and western territories. Aksumite gold fueled the imperial mint and international financial markets. Agricultural goods. The empire exported surplus wheat, barley, and wild animal skins to neighboring regions. Imports and global influence. In exchange for its raw materials, Aksum imported refined luxury items and manufactured goods that influenced local culture, architecture, and technology. Textiles and silks. High-quality fabrics from India and China were imported for the Aksumite elite. Glassware and ceramics. Roman-blown glass and Mediterranean pottery were widely distributed among the upper classes. Metals and weapons. The empire imported iron, copper, and specialized military hardware to supplement local production. Wine and olive oil, stored in amphorae. These Mediterranean staples were regular imports. For royal banquets and religious rituals. The monolithic monotony of Aksumite stele. The ancient Aksumites engineered massive, upright stone monuments, called stele, to serve as markers for underground royal tombs. Rather than focusing on dynamic architectural marvels, their masonry leaned heavily into repetition and sheer, exhausting scale. The mechanics of stationary stone, material extracted entirely from local Nephilim cyanide quarries. Transportation, dragged across miles of uneven terrain via basic leverage and log rollers. Carving, chiseled to mimic multi-story residential towers, featuring faux windows and non-functional doors. Installation, dropped vertically into deep, gravel-filled sockets to remain still for millennia, a metric of architectural slumber. The sheer density of these granite pillars provides an ideal mental landscape for counting down to deep sleep. The inactive obelisk inventory, the Great Stela 1. This monument represents the absolute peak of structural immobility. It fell and fractured during its initial erection, providing a permanent, unmoving pile of stone. The obelisk of Aksum Stela 2, a 108-step mental walk, reveals 10 levels of perfectly identical faux window frames carved directly into the solid rock face. King Azana's Stela 3. This pillar stands completely vertical, entirely rigid, and has avoided all kinetic movement for roughly 1,700 years. The Aksumite Empire, known for its vast trade network, maintained an organized domestic economy mainly based on agriculture. This ancient society depended heavily on agriculture for its survival and thrived with various agricultural innovations. Some of the significant agricultural innovations during Aksumite times included terrace farming on steep mountainsides, allowed them to utilize the land efficiently. Rainwater cisterns were constructed during the dry seasons to secure water resources. Iron plowshares were used to till the soil, which not only improved crop yields, but also preserved soil nutrients. Crop rotation was practiced to maintain soil fertility, and this technique helped preserve the productivity of their land. Teff, a primary crop mainly grown in the northern highlands, was used for making daily bread. Wheat, a primary crop grown in the northern highlands and northern lowlands, was utilized for both food and beer production. Barley, a primary crop grown mainly in the northern highlands, was cultivated for food purposes. Millet, a primary crop planted in the drier lowlands, was utilized for both food and beer production. Domestic animals like oxen, donkeys, and sheep were essential for heavy plowing and as pack animals. They were also raised for wool and meat production. Cattle, primarily kept for milk and prestige, were also essential for the community's needs. Market systems were highly developed in Aksumite times. Local barter occurred in rural villages, and currency exchange was prominent in urban centers. Salt blocks, serving as an alternative money, were widely used in Aksumite societies. Weekly markets were organized in regional towns to gather farmers together and facilitate trade transactions. In conclusion, the Aksumite Empire's domestic economy was highly organized, utilizing both agricultural innovations and a well-developed market system, which allowed them to thrive and expand their trade network over time. The currency of sovereignty and bureaucracy. King Indubis profoundly altered the economic landscape of Northeast Africa by introducing Aksumite coinage. This groundbreaking regulatory shift completely transformed a bustling regional trade hub into a meticulously structured fiscal empire. Monetary autonomy. Aksum meticulously minted its own gold, silver, and bronze coins. Geopolitical stature. It achieved the rare distinction of being the only sub-Saharan African state to issue its own specie. Imperial branding. Coins were imbued with the ruling monarch's profile to seamlessly project absolute authority. Agricultural symbolism. Early issues featured prominently ears of barley to symbolize domestic fertility. Linguistic dualism. Aksum minted its coinage in both Greek to facilitate international trade and GS for local markets. Economic standard. Gold content was structured precisely according to the Roman solidus weight standard. Fiscal control. Bureaucrats employed a standardized bronze denomination system for daily domestic tax collection of duties and taxes. This exceptional narrative on King Indubis introduces the fascinating history and intriguing political climate of the land of Ethiopia. The varied aspects of the Aksumite currency demonstrate the unique and influential role monetary policy played in shaping political and economic developments within the region. As we delve deeper into the complex interplay between sovereignty, bureaucracy, and monetary affairs, the legacy of King Indubis stands as a testament to the powerful influence of economic institutions in shaping socio-political evolution. The architecture of eternity. Monolithic engineering. Aksumite architects did not build merely for their generation. They carved their legacy directly into the basalt and granite of the earth to endure for millennia. The defining achievement of this era rests in the creation of the steely, monolithic stone towers that served as markers for royal underground tomb complexes. Unlike contemporary Roman or Persian structures built from brick and mortar, the Aksumite elite preferred single, massive blocks of stone, quarried miles away and transported across rugged terrain, using sheer human power and engineered sledges. The mastery of the stone carvers. Single block extraction workers quarried solid granite blocks, weighing up to 500 tons from nearby hills. Intricate relief carving. Artisans transformed flat stone into multi-story representations of palaces. Fake architecture. Carvings included precise details of doors, handles, locks, and window frames. The monkey head technique. Stone designs replicated the traditional wood and stone binding layers of Aksumite palaces. Monolithic obelisks. The largest standing structures represented 9-story buildings carved from a single rock, the underground royal necropolis. Beneath these towering stone markers lay the true focus of Aksumite architectural genius. Vast subterranean tomb networks. Builders used precisely cut, interlocking stone slabs to create vaulted ceilings and multi-room chambers that sealed out water and grave robbers. The structural engineering was so precise that many of these underground vaults remain completely dry and structurally sound today, safely supporting thousands of tons of soil and stone directly above them. The introduction of terraced agriculture and soil preservation mechanics. Terraced agriculture and soil preservation mechanics were pivotal in the long-term stability of the Aksumite agricultural economy. As population densities in the core regions of the empire expanded, the natural fertile valleys proved unsuitable for satisfying the required agricultural yield. It was therefore essential to systematically address this issue by implementing extensive, stone-walled terracing across the steep hillsides of the Tigray highlands. These complex structural interventions were purposeful in several concurrent aspects. Erosion mitigation. Stone walls effectively arrested the downward velocity of seasonal rainfall, reducing the risk of widespread flooding and landslides. Topsoil retention. Heavy, nutrient-rich volcanic soils were effectively avoided from washing into the lowlands, safeguarding against soil nutrient depletion and desertification. Moisture management. Leveled steps or terraces allowed water to infiltrate the ground more evenly rather than rapidly shearing the surface, which in turn maintained adequate soil moisture content. Crop harvesting. Otherwise unusable vertical inclines or slopes were successfully converted into stable plots for crop cultivation, effectively expanding the arable land area. The construction of these terraces relied crucially on the utilization of local basalt and limestone blocks. Laborers skillfully stacked these stones without mortar, employing precise dry stone engineering to ensure the structure's long-term durability against hydrostatic pressure. This resulted in the creation of step-like formations that significantly altered the regional landscape, enabling the reliable and continuous production of emmer wheat, barley, and teff. This intentional and purposeful modification of the physical geography provided the consistent caloric resources necessary to sustain the expanding urban centers, specialized artisans, and standing military forces of the ever-growing empire. The mints of Aksum and numismatic monotony, the introduction of a standardized currency under King Endubis around 270 CE, did not spark economic vitality in the late evening hours. Rather, it codified it into repetitive, microscopic metallic geometry. Aksumite moneyers spent centuries striking plankets of gold, silver, and bronze, stamping each face with the unchanging, rigid profiles of successive monarchs. Every coin featured the same stylized draped bust, framed by two upright, symmetrical ears of barley that never swayed or rustled. The minting process itself followed a rhythmic, sleep-inducing cadence. A die cutter would spend days engraving reversed Greek letters into iron dies, focusing entirely on the slow, meticulous removal of microscopic metal flakes. Once the dies were fixed, a coin striker would repeat 3 actions indefinitely: place a blank disc, swing a heavy iron mallet, and set the finished coin aside. The sound was a dull, predictable thud that echoed through the cold stone workshops of the capital from dawn until dusk. The gold tremisses, weighing a consistent 2.5 grams. These discs changed so little over generations that merchants ceased looking at the artwork entirely, relying solely on the predictable weight in their palms. The silver pieces, often bearing a small, central drop of gold inlay, these coins were inspected under dim oil lamps, forcing the eyes to strain against minute variations until the eyelids grew heavy. The bronze submisses, distributed for local daily transactions. These pieces accumulated a dull, dark patina that absorbed light, rendering their designs nearly invisible to the casual handler. The inscriptions offered no narrative thrill, consisting entirely of rigid royal titles. A typical coin face merely announced King of the Aksumites on the obverse, while the reverse offered the repetitive formula, "May this please the country." As the century waned, the language on the bronze coins shifted slowly from Greek to Ge'ez. This linguistic transition took decades, moving at a glacial pace that altered a single character every few minting cycles, ensuring that the visual landscape of Aksumite commerce remained completely static, predictable, and utterly devoid of surprise. The long-term stability and sustainability of the Aksumite urban core were entirely dependent upon the meticulously hyper-codified management of the rugged terrain surrounding it. As the geopolitical landscape dramatically shifted and the maritime trade revenues began to wane, the state intensified its focus on enhancing internal agricultural production. This transition required an uncompromising, highly repetitive and meticulous protocol specifically designed to maintain thousands of individual hillside terraces across the Tigray Plateau. The complex structural mechanics of the terrace wall alignment can be understood better if one considers the specific construction techniques utilized during the Aksumite era. The construction and preservation of these agricultural terraces followed a seemingly stiff, unvarying architectural formula. One foundation: laborers dug shallow trenches directly into the underlying basalt or limestone bedrock directly to prevent any significant movement. 2. Hard stone layering: stone cutters stacked unshaped and unmortared field stones in ascending, slightly back-slanted vertical layers to provide stability. 3. Gravity stabilization: the weight of the upper stones pressed down onto the broader base stones to prevent outward bowing. For backfill compaction, a dense mixture of gravel, small pebbles, and locally sourced silt was directly placed behind the stone face to provide reinforcement against outward bowing. 5. Seasonal soil clearance: in order to control overly rapid erosion by summer rain, farmers implemented a strict cyclical maintenance schedule which involved the initial inspection and disposal of dry stone joints, sluice gate calibration and adjustments, silt distribution from upper terraces to lower plots, reinforced wall reinforcement immediately addressing displacement or fractures, and the diversion of excess water runoff away from living quarters into communal cisterns. Soil stratification and nutrient distribution were of utmost importance in order to combat the inherent depletion of the thin, volcanic highland soil by natural processes. To maintain optimal soil fertility, Aksumite land managers employed 1. Organic matter distribution: farmers introduced manure, including animal manure and household ash, through hand hoeing into the top, -1 centimeter layer of the terrace beds in order to improve soil fertility. 2. Soil ming: farmers meticulously mixed in organic matter, including animal manure and household ash, in order to improve soil fertility and promote an optimal environment for plant growth. 3. Plantings. The utilization of a consistent planting cycle, including organic matter distribution, facilitated predictable yields of emmer wheat and barley from the same narrow strips of hillside land. The minting of sovereignty. Aksumite currency and the economic might of ancient Ethiopia. Aksum, the first sub-Saharan African state to mint its own official coinage, can be traced back to around 270 CE. King Indubis, who reigned over the kingdom at that time, introduced this innovative system to streamline international trade and facilitate trade between different nations. The monetary design of the Aksumite currency. Aksumite coins were crafted using a combination of gold, silver, and bronze elements. The coins also featured the profile of the reigning king on one side and religious symbols or inscriptions on the other side, such as ancient discs and crescent moons. The incorporation of these symbols into the coins aimed to convey different aspects of the kingdom's religious beliefs and propagate these within the local and international communities. The royal portraits. Each of the Aksumite coins featured the portrait of the king in a more detailed manner. The use of such detailed images helped to portray the king's authority, glory, and influence on the people and further strengthen the kingdom's cultural and political presence. Religious symbols. In earlier times, the coins were studded with discs and crescent moons that symbolized their connection to ancient pagan religions. After King Azana took over the reign of Aksum, he replaced these symbols with the Christian cross, thereby signifying his commitment to fostering a Christian society and maintaining its sovereignty. The Christian cross. As a result of this strategic change, the Aksumite coins not only served as financial tools to facilitate trade but also as propaganda tools to project the kingdom's power and reach beyond local boundaries. The standardization of gold currency aligns the Aksumite kingdom closely with Rome and Persia, further strengthening its geopolitical position. In addition to the economic benefits, Aksumite coins also played an integral role in internal revenue management. The use of standardized weights on these coins made it easier to collect taxes across different provinces and facilitated the smooth functioning of the kingdom's economy. In conclusion, the Aksumite currency served as an economic powerhouse for ancient Ethiopia, helping the kingdom maintain its sovereignty and influence on the international stage. The innovative design elements helped the kingdom project its power and cultural identity to global audiences, consequently strengthening its geopolitical influence. Aksumite agricultural infrastructure and terracing systems. The economic stability of the Aksumite Empire relied heavily on its sophisticated agricultural practices. To sustain an expanding urban population, Aksumite farmers modified the rugged, mountainous topography of the northern Ethiopian highlands. They engineered extensive terracing systems along steep hillsides to prevent soil erosion and maximize arable land. Water management and valley protection. Soil and water conservation. Stone-walled terraces stabilized volatile hillside soils during heavy seasonal rains. Contour bunds slowed down rainwater runoff to increase deep soil moisture. Silt traps collected fertile sediment before it could wash into deep valleys. Deforestation management preserved hilltop flora to secure natural water catchments. Irrigation and storage. Intermittent streams wadis were diverted using permanent stone gravity dams. Subterranean cisterns stored seasonal rainwater for use during dry periods. Canal networks distributed collected water evenly across low-lying valley fields. Feedlot systems provided livestock manure to systematically enrich intensively farmed plots. Crop diversity. Emmer wheat served as a foundational cereal crop for daily bread production. Barley varieties were cultivated widely for both food consumption and brewing. Teff grains thrived in the unique highland microclimates of the empire. Pulses and lentils provided essential crop rotation nitrogen to maintain soil health. The Aksumite economy was founded on its highly advanced agricultural practices, resulting in the development of sophisticated terracing systems as a means of optimizing the use of the steep hillsides of the Ethiopian highlands. This infrastructure not only prevented soil erosion but also significantly maximized water retention during the rainy seasons, ensuring agricultural productivity throughout the year. These terracing systems involved constructing intricate terrace walls from dry stone, masonry without any mortar, resulting in a sturdy and efficient system resistant to landslides. Furthermore, To address the challenges posed by fertile runoff sediment, engineers designed specialized structures known as silt traps, which were engineered barriers designed to catch and efficiently store the sediment. Crop rotation was another critical practice employed within the agricultural system. The principle of crop rotation involved alternating between the planting of emmer wheat, barley, and teff in different years. This allowed farmers to maintain a healthy soil, minimize weed competition, and also decrease the buildup of invasive species due to prolonged exposure to one plant species. Additionally, the extensive use of cattle for plowing rocky fields also contributed significantly to maintaining agricultural productivity. Water management reached beyond the fields, extending into urban centers via the construction of enormous subterranean cisterns and open-air reservoirs that could sustain populations during dry spells. These structures required strict civic oversight, reflecting the highly centralized administrative authority characteristic of Aksumite society. Overall, the integration of advanced agricultural practices, innovative engineering, and civic oversight facilitated the successful development of the Aksumite economy, which was characterized by remarkable innovation and resilience during a period characterized by harsh climate and resource scarcity. The architectural echoes and modern legacy of Aksum. The historical landmarks of the Aksumite Empire remain evident in the landscape of the northern parts of Ethiopia, serving as a tranquil reminder of its magnificent past. The gigantic monolithic stelae, sculpted from single blocks of granite, are the most recognizable symbols of this exceptional architectural expertise. These monumental structures, several of which standing over a stunning 20 meters tall, resemble multi-story buildings with intricately carved multi-carved doors, windows, and floor dividers. They predominantly functioned as indicators for the elite underground burial chambers, preserving the permanent memory of Aksum's ruling class contained within the very stones of earth. Within the context of the empire's waning political power, after the 7th century, its unique cultural and architectural heritage was not entirely dissolved. Instead, it retreated into the shelter of the highlands. The remarkable Aksumite construction technique adopting layered stone masonry combined with horizontal wooden beams, recognized as monkey heads, directly influenced the innovative design of later Ethiopian architecture. This distinct style is immediately visible in the ancient monastery of Debre Damo, and it also played a significant role in shaping the famous 12th century rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. At present, the modern town of Aksum is recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Site and serves as a vital living center for Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, which traditionally houses the Sacred Ark of the Covenant, connects contemporary spiritual life with the conversion of King Azana in the 4th century. Despite the decline in trade connections across the Red Sea, the language, writing system, religious institutions, and the structural engineering emanating from during the Aksumite era continue to serve as the foundation of Ethiopian national identity. The ancient Aksumite civilization was an incredibly powerful and prosperous trading empire that flourished in modern-day Eritrea and northern Ethiopia between the 1st and 7th century CE. Its prominence as a vital maritime link between the Roman Empire and ancient India made it a major geographical and historical force in its time. Key highlights include 1. Global trade hub. As a significant maritime center, the port city of Agilis played a pivotal role in controlling the Red Sea trade, facilitating trade with countries like Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. The empire's exports were primarily gold, ivory, and emeralds. 2. Architectural marvels. The Aksumite civilization is famous for having carved massive, monolithic stone towers called stelae to symbolize royal tombs. These marvelous structures showcased their architectural prowess and contributed to their lasting impact. 3. Religious pivot. The Aksumite people adopted Christianity in the 4th century CE under King Azana, marking a significant historical shift. Christianity became the official religion of the empire, making it one of the first empires to do so. For unique innovation, the Aksumite civilization also had a unique innovation in the field of coinage, minting its own gold, silver, and bronze coins, signaling immense economic sovereignty and independence. 5. A gradual decline. As the Aksumite Empire experienced a decline in control over vital trade routes due to the rise of powerful Islamic empires, it ultimately led to economic isolation and ultimately collapse. If you happen to still be awake, your mind is undoubtedly still quite active. If you find yourself thinking a lot more than usual, there's no need to worry, as you can simply continue watching the following videos to experience comfort, relaxation, and even reach deep healing sleep. All it takes is pouring you down a cup of hot tea and relaxing with your favorite movie. Besides, if you're experiencing insomnia and finding it difficult to get some restful sleep, there's no better time than now to try some simple techniques that can ease your troubles. You can engage in activities that promote relaxation, such as deep breathing exercises or even some meditation. Remember to maintain a routine, ensuring you get at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. If feeling stressed and overwhelmed by it all, don't hesitate to share your feelings with someone close to you. This could be a family member, a friend, or even someone you trust. It's essential to have open communication in times like these. By doing so, not only will you be able to let off steam, but you'll also find reasons to be more optimistic about things. So, let's keep in touch, share your thoughts and feelings, and let's work together to improve our well-being. Thank you for taking the time to hear my words, and I hope you find this message encouraging. Stay healthy, take care, and remember to stay positive.